He walked into that dinner expecting a free meal and a few laughs with old friends. What he got instead was 20 people secretly waiting to watch him humiliate himself, and a woman sitting beside him who could have purchased the entire city block without blinking. Nobody warned him. Nobody warned her. And the man who arranged it all thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever done. He was wrong. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel will stop you mid-scroll every single time. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far the story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next at that dinner table will surprise you. The snow had been falling since noon, and by 7 in the evening, Chicago wore it the way the city always did in February, heavily, without apology, like a coat it never bothered to take off. Callan Reed drove his 11-year-old Honda through the slush on North Clark Street with one hand on the wheel and his phone balanced on his knee. Reading the address, Travis had texted him 3 times, because Callan kept second-guessing whether a place called Maison Ellery was really somewhere a building inspector from Pilsen belonged on a Thursday night. It was not. He knew that the moment a valet appeared at his window, wearing a jacket that cost more than Callan's monthly car payment. He handed over the keys with the particular dignity of a man who had already decided he didn't care, even though he absolutely cared. Inside, the restaurant hummed with the specific sound of money being comfortable. Not loud, not flashy, just assured. The kind of quiet that only existed when everyone in the room already had whatever they wanted and had stopped needing to announce it. Travis was waiting near the bar, holding a glass of something amber and grinning with the wide, uncomplicated happiness of a man who knew something nobody else did. That grin should have been Callan's first warning. "You look terrible," Travis said, which was his version of affection. "I came straight from a job site," Callan said. "Somebody's furnace exhaust was venting directly into a bedroom wall." "And you changed where, exactly?" "In the parking garage." Travis looked him up and down, dark jeans, a gray thermal under an unbuttoned flannel, work boots that had been wiped clean but not convincingly. "Perfect," Travis said, and he genuinely seemed to mean it, which should have been warning number 2. Travis Boone had made enough money in commercial real estate before 40 to spend the next decade making other people mildly uncomfortable for his own amusement. He was not cruel, not truly, but he had the particular boredom of someone who had removed most sources of genuine surprise from his life and now manufactured them wherever he could. He was also, in his way, one of the best friends Callan had ever had, which was the only reason Callan was standing in a restaurant where the dinner rolls probably cost $12 each. "How many people?" Callan asked. 20, give or take." "Come on. Everybody's already at the table." The private dining room at Maison Ellery seated exactly 22, and when Callan walked in, it held 19 people mid-conversation and 1 empty chair. He knew most of the faces: Travis's architect wife, Diane. A few guys from their old neighborhood who had drifted into different tax brackets. Some people Callan didn't recognize, but who had the easy posture of individuals accustomed to being recognized. And 1 empty chair, beside another empty chair. Travis guided him toward it with a hand on his shoulder and the practiced casualness of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Sit here," Travis said. "I saved you a spot." Callan sat. He poured himself water. He picked up the menu, looked at the prices, quietly set it back down, and decided he would order whatever Travis was paying for, because Travis had invited him, and Travis owed him approximately 400 favors going back to 1998. He was reading the bread description, which was, in fact, a full paragraph long when the room shifted. He didn't see it at first. He felt it. That particular change in group energy when something unexpected walks through a door. Conversations didn't stop, but they thinned. Heads turned with the practiced indirection of people, trying not to look like they were looking. Callan looked. The woman who entered was perhaps 50, though she carried the age the way certain people did, not fighting it, not performing youth, simply inhabiting herself with a completeness that made the question irrelevant. She was dressed in charcoal, something understated and clearly expensive, her dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. She moved through the room with the measured ease of someone who had long ago stopped being nervous in public spaces. She was also, Callan realized, heading toward the empty chair beside him. He stood. He wasn't sure why exactly. It wasn't calculated. His mother had raised him a certain way, and some things stayed in the muscle even when you stopped thinking about them. The woman paused almost imperceptibly when he rose, like the gesture had briefly surprised her. "Helena Vaymont," she said, extending her hand. Callan Reed. He shook it. Her grip was firm and direct. "Travis didn't mention." "No," she said, glancing toward Travis with an expression that was entirely unreadable. "He didn't mention me either." She sat. Callan sat. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because across the table, someone had already begun whispering, and the whisper had the specific texture of a joke being passed along. It reached Callan as these things always did, not as words, but as the shape of them. The sideways glance, the suppressed smile. The way Marcus Dean, Travis's college friend, leaned toward his wife and murmured something that made her press her lips together in that particular way people did when they were trying not to laugh at something they knew they probably shouldn't. Then Derek Howell, who Callan had known since high school and who had never fully matured past the age of 17 despite owning 3 car dealerships, said it plainly enough for the nearest 6 people to hear. "Callan, man, did Travis invite your mom?" A few people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Callan put down his water glass. He looked at Derek. Then he looked briefly at Helena beside him. Her expression had not changed. It was composed with the kind of professional stillness that told him she had heard this before, or something like it, and had made her peace with the need to simply absorb it. That, more than anything, bothered him. "Maybe," Callan said, and his voice came out quieter than he intended, which somehow made it carry further. "Wait until you actually know someone before deciding she's the punchline." The table went awkward in the way tables do when someone says the thing that resets the room. Derek started to respond, thought better of it, and reached for his wine. Travis, Callan noticed it, was watching from the far end of the table with an expression that had shifted from amused to something harder to name. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Helena turned toward Callan. "Not fully. Just enough. You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Callan said. "I wanted to." She studied him for a moment with dark eyes that were, he noticed, extremely good at not revealing what was happening behind them. "You don't know who I am," she said. It wasn't a question. "Should I?" She considered that. Then something shifted in her face, not a smile. Not yet, but the preparation for one. "No," she said. "Actually, I don't think you should." Dinner was not what Callan expected. He had braced himself for 2 hours of silent endurance beside a woman who would rightfully spend the evening irritated at being used as someone else's setup. Instead, Helena ate her salmon with the focused attention of someone who took food seriously, asked Callan 3 questions about building inspection that were specific enough to be genuine, and at one point made a dry observation about the restaurant's acoustics that the architect had prioritized intimacy over functionality. And as a result, the room felt smaller than its square footage warranted. That was so precise and unexpected that Callan laughed before he caught himself. "You know buildings," he said. "I've been inside enough of them." "Professionally?" "Professionally," she agreed, and left it at that. She didn't elaborate. She didn't perform. She didn't fill silence with the reflexive small talk that most people used to paper over discomfort. When the conversation paused, she simply let it pause, and Callan, who had spent the last 4 years surrounded by the constant noise of a small child, co-workers, and clients, found the quality of her silence unexpectedly restful. He told her about Maisie without planning to. It came up naturally when she asked how long he'd been in Chicago, and he explained that he'd grown up in Bridgeport, left for 3 years after college, came back when his daughter was born, and hadn't seriously considered leaving since. "She's 7, he said, going on 40. Only children often are." "You sound like you know the type." "I was one," Helena said. She said it without particular emotion, the way people stated facts that had long since stopped being sore spots. "My parents worked. I entertained myself. You learn to be serious early." "Was that good or bad?" She turned her wine glass slowly between her fingers. "Both," she said, at different times. Across the table, Derek had stopped making jokes. Marcus was deep in conversation with Travis's wife. The dinner had settled into its ordinary rhythms, and Callan realized at some point that he and Helena had effectively become their own smaller gathering within the larger 1-2 people, talking in the specific way you talked when you'd stopped performing for an audience. He liked her, he realized. Just straightforwardly liked her. The way you liked someone who was interesting and direct and didn't waste your time. He didn't think much about the 18 years between them. He wasn't sure exactly why. Maybe because she didn't seem to think about it, and he was generally inclined to take his cues from the people around him on questions like that. Maybe because Maisie had recently taught him that age was mostly a number people used to sort themselves into groups when they weren't sure what else to organize by. Dessert came. A chocolate thing with a French name that Callan didn't try to pronounce. Helena tasted it and said it was slightly oversweetened. Callan tasted it and said it was the best thing he'd eaten in 3 weeks. She looked at him. When did you last eat somewhere that wasn't a school cafeteria or a job site? He thought about it honestly. October, maybe? Travis's birthday was at a steakhouse. October, she repeated. It's February. Kids are expensive. She didn't say anything to that. But she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read that was somewhere between recognition and something softer. The end of the evening arrived the way good evenings did too quickly, and with the mild melancholy of something that had been better than anticipated. People gathered coats. Travis made a toast that was mostly about himself. Hugs were exchanged with the variable enthusiasm of 20 people at different stages of tiredness and sobriety. Callan was reaching for his jacket when he noticed the shift. A man had appeared at the edge of the room, not a guest, clearly, from his posture and the quality of his attention. Mid-50s, suit that fit too well, watching the room rather than participating in it. He moved toward Helena the way people move towards someone they'd been waiting for. Not urgently, with the patience of someone whose job was managing other people's time. "Ms. Vaymont," he said, "whenever you're ready." Callan watched Helena nod a small, efficient gesture, and then watched as the restaurant owner himself materialized from somewhere near the kitchen, personally extending his hand. "It was an honor, as always," the owner said. Helena shook his hand with the practiced warmth of someone who did this often, and genuinely meant some of it. Then she turned, and for a moment she and Callan were facing each other while the room moved around them. "It was a surprisingly good evening," she said. Considering how it started, Callan agreed. Something passed across her face. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. "Considering," she said. She left through the front entrance, and through the restaurant's glass front, Callan watched a dark car, long, quiet, the kind that didn't advertise what it cost, because it didn't need to pull smoothly to the curb. Travis appeared at his shoulder, so Travis said. "So," Callan said, "what did you think?" Callan watched the car slide into traffic and disappear. "She's interesting," he said. "Who is she?" Travis had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I probably should have mentioned this before dinner." Callan turned to look at him. Travis's grin had changed again. It was no longer the wide, knowing smile of a man with a secret. It was the slightly smaller smile of a man who was beginning to wonder whether his joke had turned into something else entirely. "Helena Vaymont," Travis said, as in Vaymont Meridian. Callan stared at him. "The shipping company?" "Infrastructure and logistics empire," Travis corrected. "Worth somewhere north of $4 billion, depending on the quarter." He paused. "She's the founder and the chairwoman, and more or less the reason 3% of every major construction project in the Midwest gets supplied on time." Callan looked back at the empty street where the car had been. $4 billion. He thought about the way she'd talked about the restaurant's acoustics. The way she'd let silence sit without rushing to fill it. The way she had absorbed Derek's stupid joke without flinching, because she'd clearly absorbed worse from people with more to lose. He thought about the chocolate dessert and the fact that she'd split the last bite with him without being asked. "Travis," Callan said. "Yeah, you set me up on a blind date with a billionaire as a joke." Travis had the particular expression of a man who was recalibrating the definition of his own actions in real time. "I set you up next to her as a... It wasn't... Look, I thought it would be funny." "The age gap, you showing up in work boots, as a joke," Callan repeated. "The joke kind of didn't work the way I planned." Callan picked up his jacket. He thought about Maisie at home with the babysitter, probably asleep now, her hair spread across her pillow, one arm around the stuffed stegosaurus she'd named Gerald for reasons she had never satisfactorily explained. He thought about a woman who ran a billion-dollar empire eating salmon carefully and telling him that only children learn to be serious early. He put on his jacket. "Good night, Travis," he said. He walked out into the February cold, collected his Honda from the valet, who handed over the keys with commendable professionalism and drove home through streets that were quieter now, the snow still falling, the city doing the slow, cold work of burying another ordinary Thursday. He did not expect to hear from her again. He was wrong about that. He didn't sleep well. That wasn't unusual. Callan Reed hadn't slept particularly well in 4 years, not since the night the hospital called, and the shape of his life changed permanently in the span of a single phone conversation. But this restlessness was different. Not the grinding, practical anxiety of unpaid bills, or a sick child, or a furnace inspection that had gone sideways. This was something quieter and more inconvenient. The kind of restlessness that came from thinking about a person. He lay on his back in the dark of his apartment on South Carpenter Street and thought about a woman who had split a chocolate dessert with him without being asked, and who had told him that only children learned to be serious early, and who had been absorbed into a dark car outside a restaurant on North Clark while the snow kept falling and the city kept doing what the city always did, which was continue without him. He thought, she runs a $4 billion company. He thought, she ate at a neighborhood dinner party arranged by Travis Boone. He thought, she heard someone call her someone's mother, and she didn't flinch. Then he thought about the way she'd looked at him after he'd said what he said to Derek, not with gratitude, exactly, and not with the softened expression people wore when they were touched by something. It was more careful than that, more considered, like she was filing the information away in a place where she kept things that mattered. He fell asleep somewhere around 2. His alarm went off at 6:15 because Maisie had school at 8 in the morning. Routine with a 7-year-old was not a thing that tolerated sleeping in. Maisie ate her cereal with the focused intensity she brought to everything she considered important, which included breakfast, the construction of cardboard structures, and the ongoing narrative saga of Gerald the stuffed stegosaurus, who had apparently developed a complicated social life while Callan was at work. Gerald had an argument with the other dinosaurs. Maisie reported between bites. Which ones? The plastic ones from the museum gift shop. They're not as smart. That's probably not a fair. Gerald won, Maisie said, and closed the subject. Callan drank his coffee second cup, which he needed more than he wanted to admit, and watched his daughter's serious, small face over the rim of his mug. She had her mother's coloring, dark eyes and dark hair that refused to stay in any braid he attempted, and she had inherited from somewhere Callan suspected from herself, because the trait seemed genuinely original, a quality of total conviction in everything she decided. Maisie Reed did not do halfway. She was either completely in or completely absent, and the things she chose to be completely in about were frequently surprising and always non-negotiable. Currently, she was completely in about Gerald cardboard architecture, the television program about deep-sea fish that she watched with the intensity of a doctoral student, and an ongoing project to teach herself to whistle that had been producing a series of increasingly hopeful sounds for 3 weeks. Callan drove her to school, walked her to the entrance, received a hug that was quick and slightly distracted because she had already spotted her friend Priya near the doors, and her attention had reallocated completely, and then stood on the sidewalk in the February cold for a moment, watching her disappear inside. Then he got back in his car. His phone rang at 10:17. He was parked outside a 2-flat in Lincoln Square, reviewing the inspection notes from the previous week when the call came through. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He usually did with unknown numbers, because they were either automated warranty extensions or the kind of contractor disputes that were better handled in writing, but something made him answer. Callan Reed, he said, a brief pause. Then, this is Helena Vaymont. He stopped reviewing his notes. Oh, he said, which was not his most articulate moment, but it was honest. I got your number from Travis, she said, with the particular flatness of someone who had made exactly the call they decided to make and was not going to apologize for it. I hope that's all right. It's fine. Yes, of course. He set down his clipboard. Good morning. Good morning. Another small pause, not uncomfortable, he realized, just measured. She spoke the way she did everything. He was beginning to understand, with the timing of someone who didn't fill space until she had something to put in it. I'd like to have dinner with you. Callan looked at the steering wheel. With me, he said. With you. Alone this time, without Travis's production design. The faintest edge of dry amusement in her voice. I realize that's a significant proposal given how the first dinner was arranged. You have every reason to say no. He thought about it for exactly 3 seconds, which was probably 2 seconds longer than he should have needed. Okay, he said. Another pause, shorter this time. Okay, yes, I'd like that. Friday evening. 7 o'clock. She gave him an address that he wrote on the corner of his inspection notes. Dress however you like. She hung up before he could ask anything else, and he sat in his car outside the Lincoln Square, too flat for a solid minute afterward, looking at the address he'd written and wondering whether he'd imagined the entire conversation. He hadn't imagined it. He called Travis. She called me, Callan said when Travis picked up. I know. She called me first to get your number. She was extremely polite about it, which was somehow more terrifying than if she'd been angry. Travis. Callan tried to find the beginning of what he wanted to say. You set me up on a blind date with a billionaire as a joke. You said that last night. I'm saying it again because I need you to understand what you did. I know what you thought. You thought the age gap would be funny. You thought she'd be stiff and I'd be uncomfortable, and everyone would have a story to tell at the next party. Travis was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said without his usual ease. That's what I thought. What you actually did, Callan said, was put a 50-year-old woman in a room full of people waiting to laugh at her. The silence on the other end of the line had a different quality now. I know, Travis said, and for once he sounded like the person Callan had known since they were kids in Bridgeport, rather than the person he'd become after money made irony easier. I didn't think it through. No. Are you going to dinner with her? Yes. Another pause. I'll talk to you later, Travis. He hung up, picked up his clipboard, and went to inspect the two-flat, because the work didn't wait and neither did the city, and he had 3 more properties on his list before school pickup at 3:15. He almost called to cancel twice. The first time was Wednesday evening, when he looked up Helena Vaymont on his phone after Maisie was in bed and spent 45 minutes reading about a woman who had built a privately held logistics company from a single regional freight operation into one of the largest infrastructure networks in the American Midwest. Articles in business publications used words like formidable and visionary and fiercely private, which was a specific combination that told him she was someone who had achieved things that made other people nervous and had then declined to make it easy for them by being warm about it. There were photographs, fewer than he expected given her level of success. She didn't go to galas for the visibility. She went, when she went, because she needed to or because she wanted to. And she looked in every photograph composed, watchful, present, in a way that was somehow different from approachable. Like someone who was paying attention to everything and enjoying almost none of it. One photograph was different. He found it in the archive of a Chicago business journal from 6 years back. She was standing at a groundbreaking ceremony for a logistics hub on the south side, hard hats, mud, people in suits, pretending to be comfortable outdoors, and someone had caught her in a moment she clearly hadn't arranged. She was looking at something off-frame, and she was almost smiling. Not quite, but almost. The expression on her face was the one she'd worn when she said the chocolate dessert was oversweetened and then watched Callan announce it was the best thing he'd eaten in 3 weeks. He put down his phone and did not call to cancel. The second near cancellation happened Friday afternoon when he picked up Maisie from school, and she asked, with the directness that she deployed without warning, "Are you going on a date tonight?" He looked at her in the rearview mirror. "What makes you ask?" "You ironed your shirt yesterday." "You never iron your shirt." "I iron my shirt." When he couldn't produce a specific example. "The babysitter is coming at 6:30, he said. "It's just dinner." Maisie considered this with her usual thoroughness. "Is she nice?" "I think so. I've only met her once." "Did she like you?" "I honestly don't know." Maisie nodded slowly, in the manner of someone reserving judgment pending further evidence, which was exactly what Callan himself would have done. "Okay," she said. "You should wear the blue one. Not the gray one. The gray one makes you look tired." "Thank you, Maisie." "You're welcome," she said, and looked back out the window. He wore the blue one. The address Helena had given him was not a restaurant. He double-checked the number twice, standing on the sidewalk of a tree-lined street in the neighborhood, looking at a building that was a converted 19th-century coach house brick, ivy-covered in summer but bare-limbed now, with warm light behind the ground-floor windows. A woman he didn't recognize opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Reed? Ms. Vaymont is expecting you. Come in." Inside was a kitchen, a real one, the kind that people cooked in, not the kind that was designed to impress. Pots on an actual stovetop, something that smelled like garlic and wine and braised meat, a small table set for two near a window that looked out onto a private courtyard where snow still covered the garden. Helena was at the stove. She had her back to him, and she was wearing dark trousers and a simple cream sweater, and her hair was down in a way it hadn't been at the restaurant. And when she turned around, she was holding a wooden spoon and had what appeared to be a small splash of something tomato-based on her sleeve. She looked at the sleeve, then at him. "I had the option of a private dining room or this," she said. "I chose this. I like this better," Callan said honestly. "Good. Sit down. The wine is already open." He sat at the small table and poured 2 glasses while she finished whatever was happening in the pan, and the woman who had let him in disappeared somewhere in the house's interior and did not return. And gradually Callan understood that Helena had arranged the house, the cooking, the absence of staff deliberately. Not to impress him. To tell him something. "You cooked," he said. "Don't make it a thing. I'm not making it a thing. I'm observing. I cook on Fridays when I can." She adjusted the flame on the stove with the focused attention she seemed to bring to everything involving specifics. "It requires being in a single physical location for 2 hours. I don't have that most days." "How many days a week are you in a single location?" "Most of my days involve at least one flight." She said it the way people described routine conditions, not proudly, not complainingly, just as information. "I have facilities in 6 cities. I travel between them." "And the rest?" "Video calls," she said, "which are efficient and terrible." She brought the food to the table: braised chicken, something with lentils, bread she'd bought rather than made, which she mentioned without being asked, as though she wanted him to have accurate information. She sat across from him, and they ate, and it was nothing like the restaurant. Without 20 people surrounding them, and a joke circulating the table, and the specific performance anxiety of being observed, what was left was just 2 people eating food that had been made with attention and talking without the pressure of an audience. She asked him about the inspection job. Not the way people usually did, with the slightly glazed politeness of someone who had asked the question they felt required to ask, but specifically. What determined when a building failed? What happened when a contractor appealed a failed inspection? How he'd gotten into the work. "My grandfather was a contractor," Callan said. "I grew up in job sites. I know how buildings are supposed to work." "Do you like it?" He thought about it honestly. "Most days. Some days I'm writing up violations on a building that a family is living in, and I know that fixing the violations is going to cost the landlord enough that he'll raise rent instead of doing the work, and the family will have to move." He paused. "Those days I don't like it, but you keep doing it. Somebody has to." She looked at him with that careful filing expression. "That's either the most practical thing I've heard or the most idealistic." "Can't it be both?" "I suppose it can." She told him about Vaymont Meridian without him asking, which surprised him a little. She told it the way she did most things, without drama and without false modesty, which was its own kind of confidence. She had started with a single freight contract in her late 20s, backed by money she'd borrowed from a bank that had made her provide twice the collateral a man of equivalent creditworthiness would have been required to produce. She had turned that contract into a regional network, the regional network into a national infrastructure system. And at some point, the company had become too large to fail in the specific way that made it not entirely hers anymore, even though she still owned the majority of it. "Do you ever wish you'd built something smaller?" Callan asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she said. "A smaller thing would have required less of me." She turned her wine glass. "But I built what I built. You can't unbuild something that size." "Would you want to?" "No. Direct, immediate. No, I'm proud of it. I just understand the costs now in a way I didn't when I was making the decisions." "What did it cost you?" She looked at him steadily. "The standard things," she said. "Time, marriage, children, eventually, once I understood that the window for that had quietly closed while I was paying attention to other things." She said this without self-pity, which was how Callan knew it had cost her something she didn't entirely have words for. "You make choices, and the choices make you." They sat with that for a moment. "I made a different choice," Callan said. "Not better. Just different." "I know," she said. "You chose a person over a plan." He thought about the night Maisie was born, and the night 8 months later when everything changed. and the 4 years between then and now that had been the hardest and most clarifying period of his entire life. "I don't know that I chose," he said. "I think the situation chose, and I just decided what kind of person I was going to be about it." Helena looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is exactly what choosing is." He went home at 10:30 because the babysitter had a curfew and because he was the kind of person who honored the arrangements he made. At the door of the coach house, standing in the cold, Helena said, "I'd like to do this again." "So would I," Callan said. "I'm in Cincinnati Tuesday and Wednesday." "I'm back Thursday. Thursday works." She nodded. And then she said, with the same directness she brought to everything, "I want to be clear about something. I'm not good at the early part of this. I'm not," she stopped. "Tried again. I'm better at managing things than at being uncertain about them. I find that I am unexpectedly uncertain about you, which is uncomfortable." He looked at her. "That's a very honest thing to say." "I'm aware. I'm also uncertain," he said, "for what it's worth." She almost smiled again. It was becoming his favorite expression because it was so obviously involuntary. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. He drove home through streets that were salted and gray and lit by the sodium orange of Chicago in winter, and he felt, underneath the uncertainty she'd accurately named, something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Not happiness exactly, he was generally suspicious of uncomplicated happiness as a category. Something more durable than that, the specific, tentative warmth of something that might be worth protecting. They had 4 more dinners over the following 3 weeks. Not all of them went smoothly, which was part of what made them real. The second Thursday, Helena was 2 hours late because a contract dispute in Cincinnati had extended into the afternoon, and she'd caught the last possible flight and arrived at the restaurant, still wearing the focused remoteness of someone who had spent 10 hours in professional combat and hadn't fully re-entered civilian life. She apologized. Callan told her it was fine and meant it, and ordered her a drink and gave her 15 minutes to decompress before they talked about anything. And somewhere during those 15 minutes, he watched her physically change, the professional armor coming loose, like something she was putting down rather than taking off, and thought, that's a thing she has to do every time. Come back from that, every day. The third dinner she asked about Maisie's mother. It was not a casual question, and she didn't frame it casually, which he appreciated. "You don't have to tell me," she said, "but I want to understand the shape of things." He told her. Her name was Rachel. They'd been together 3 years, married for 1. The pregnancy had been unplanned, but genuinely welcome by both of them. And then, 8 months after Maisie was born, Rachel had found a lump, and the next 14 months had been the particular kind of nightmare that took everything you thought you knew about endurance and showed you the true dimensions of it. And then she was gone, and Callan was 37, no, 28. He'd been 28 with a 13-month-old, and a grief that didn't have a shape yet because he hadn't been able to stop moving long enough to find out. He told this in the flat, careful way he'd learned to tell it, because the other way, the full contact version, was not available to him in public spaces. He'd learned that the hard way. Helena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "How old is she now, Maisie?" 7. "So you've been doing this for 6 years. Almost." "Alone. My mother helps when she can. Travis occasionally when he's not being an idiot." He paused. "Mostly alone." Helena looked at him across the table. "I think," she said carefully, "that you may be the most quietly stubborn person I have ever met." "Is that a compliment?" "I haven't decided," she said. And then, before he could respond, my father died when I was 11. My mother worked 2 jobs after that. I watched her do everything alone, and I told myself when I was 12 years old that I was never going to need anyone to do anything for me. She said this without drama, like explaining the origin of a scar rather than reopening it. I built an entire company out of that decision, and I have spent 30 years being completely self-sufficient and occasionally very lonely. Callan looked at her. "I'm not good at needing help," she continued. "I'm telling you that up front, because it will probably annoy you at some point." "I'm not good at accepting it," Callan said. "So we're probably even." She laughed at that, a real one, different from the almost smiles, shorter and more surprised, like it had gotten out before she'd had a chance to decide whether to release it. He thought, there it is. The 4th dinner was at his apartment. He hadn't planned it that way. She'd called that afternoon, she called rather than texted, which he'd noticed and which suited him because he'd never fully trusted text as a medium. For anything that mattered to say she was back early from a trip to Detroit, and did he have plans? And he'd said he didn't. And Maisie was home, and there was a pot of pasta sauce on the stove because Tuesday was pasta night and he'd already started. And then there was a pause, during which Helena apparently made a decision. "Can I come there?" she asked. He was quiet for a second. "It's not—" He looked around his kitchen. The crayon drawing Maisie had made and taped to the refrigerator because she considered it important institutional art. The stack of school permission slips he kept meaning to sort. The small pasta pot and the wooden spoon and the completely ordinary reality of his completely ordinary apartment. "It's not anything like the places we've been," he said. "I know," Helena said. "That's why I'm asking." She arrived 40 minutes later, and she met Maisie. He hadn't orchestrated it. He'd told Maisie a friend was coming for dinner, which was technically accurate, and Maisie had accepted this information and returned to her project, which was the construction of a cardboard castle using a refrigerator box Callan had acquired from a neighbor who'd bought a new appliance. The castle was in an ambitious middle-phase walls, standing but the tower situation unresolved, and Maisie was approaching the engineering problem with the gravity it deserved. Helena knocked. Callan opened the door, and from the living room came Maisie's voice. "Is that your friend?" "Yes," Callan said. "Tell her to come look at my castle." "I need a second opinion." He looked at Helena. Helena looked past him toward the living room, where 7-year-old Maisie Reed was standing beside a refrigerator box structure taller than she was, one hand on her hip, wearing the expression of an architect who had run into a problem and required consultation. Something happened on Helena's face that Callan had not seen there before. Something quick and unguarded and genuine, gone almost as soon as it arrived, but he caught it. She stepped inside. "Let me see," Helena said. He watched them from the kitchen doorway while the pasta finished cooking. They were on the floor, both of them. Helena Vivant, chairwoman of a $4 billion infrastructure empire, was sitting cross-legged on his living room floor beside a 7-year-old girl he'd raised alone for 6 years, and they were discussing load-bearing principles as they applied to the upper tower of a cardboard castle, and Maisie was explaining her theory with the full focus of someone who had thought about this seriously and expected to be taken seriously in return. Helena took her seriously. She suggested reinforcing the interior corners. She asked about the planned height of the tower. She considered the question of whether the drawbridge needed to be functional or was primarily decorative, and when Maisie said functional emphatically, non-negotiably functional, Helena said, "Right. Aesthetic elements should serve the structure," and Maisie pointed at her and said, "Exactly." Callan served dinner. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, and Maisie asked Helena questions with the fearlessness of someone who had not yet learned that adults sometimes found direct questions uncomfortable. She asked what Helena's job was. Helena described logistics in terms Maisie could follow, involving trucks and trains, and the specific problem of making sure the right thing was in the right place at the right time. Maisie said that sounded like a puzzle. Helena said it was exactly like a puzzle, just one that cost a lot of money when you got it wrong. "Do you get it wrong sometimes?" Maisie asked. "Yes," Helena said. "What happens?" "I fix it." Maisie nodded. This was apparently the correct answer. After dinner, Maisie returned to the castle. Helena stayed at the kitchen table while Callan washed the dishes, and they talked the way they'd been talking without performance, without the slightly formal overlay of the restaurant settings, and at some point Helena said, without looking up from the mug of coffee she was holding with both hands, "She's remarkable." "She is," Callan said. "She gets it from you." He shook his head. "She gets it from herself." Helena looked up. "That's what I just said." He put the last dish in the drying rack. The apartment was quiet around them. Maisie in the living room, the faint sound of cardboard being adjusted, the refrigerator's hum. It was the most ordinary evening possible, and Callan had the acute, slightly alarming awareness that Helena Vaimont was not looking around his apartment with the polite tolerance of someone from a larger world enduring a smaller one. She was looking around it the way someone looked at a place where real things happened. "I should go," she said, though she didn't move immediately. "Probably." She stood, and Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway with impeccable timing, holding a cardboard triangle she'd fashioned into a tower roof. "You have to come back," she announced to Helena. "We're not finished." Helena looked at her for a moment. I know, she said. I'll come back. Promise? Yes, Helena said, I promise. Callan walked her to the door. In the hallway, waiting for the elevator, his building had an elevator. Though it moved with the deliberate pace of something that had been taking its time since 1987, Helena turned to him. I've built things for 30 years, she said. Been good at it. I know. I don't know how to build this kind of thing. She gestured slightly, meaning the apartment, the evening, Maisie's cardboard castle, all of it. I'm aware I don't know how. Neither do I, Callan said. I'm figuring it out the same way I've figured out everything in the last 6 years, which is mostly wrong the first time and then better. The elevator arrived. She stepped in, turned, and faced him through the gap in the doors. And for a moment she looked, not like the woman from the photographs in the business journals, but like someone standing at the edge of something large and uncertain and choosing, despite all of that, to step toward it. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. The doors closed. He went back inside, helped Maisie secure the tower roof with a strip of packing tape, and sat on the floor of his living room for an hour, while his daughter explained her architectural vision in exhaustive detail and thought that whatever was happening was the most unexpected thing that had happened to him in a very long time, and that unexpected was not the same as unwelcome, and that he was going to be careful with it, because the things worth having were the ones that broke if you weren't. Maisie eventually looked up from the castle and studied him with the particular parental instinct children sometimes reversed onto their parents. You like her, she said. It wasn't a question, I think so, Callan said. Maisie returned to the castle. Good, she said. She knows about load-bearing. He laughed. She didn't look up, but she smiled, and the evening settled around them the way good evenings did, not perfectly, not without complication, but warmly, and with the specific texture of something real. The thing about happiness, the real, inconvenient kind, was that it had a way of making itself visible before you were ready to defend it. Callan noticed it first in small ways. He started sleeping better, which after 4 years of light, listening sleep felt almost suspicious, like his body had received information his mind hadn't processed yet. He caught himself in the middle of inspection walkthroughs, thinking about something Helena had said, retrieving a particular phrase the way you'd reach for something you'd left in a coat pocket and were glad to find still there. He ironed shirts on days that didn't require it. Maisie noticed and said nothing, which was its own form of commentary. The 6 weeks after the cardboard castle evening had the quality of something being built carefully, not because either of them had decided to be careful, but because they both understood, without discussing it, that the thing they were building was not simple and would not survive being rushed. Helena came to the apartment twice more. Once, she and Maisie finished the castle, completing the drawbridge with a working hinge mechanism that Maisie considered a personal triumph, and Helena approached with the quiet focus of someone solving a real engineering problem. The second time she arrived late, after a conference call that had run 2 hours past its scheduled end, and sat at Callan's kitchen table with her shoes off and her hair loose and drank tea, while he finished reading Maisie her bedtime story from the adjoining room. And when he came back out, Helena was staring at the crayon drawings on the refrigerator with an expression he didn't want to interrupt. They went to dinner when they could. Sometimes her schedule collapsed, and she called from an airport in another city, and they talked for an hour while she waited for a connection. And those conversations had a different texture than the in-person ones, looser. Somehow, without the slight self-consciousness of being visible to each other. She told him things in those calls that she probably wouldn't have said across a restaurant table. About the particular exhaustion of authority, of being the person everyone in the room was waiting on, of never being able to have a bad day in public because a bad day at her level produced ripple effects she was responsible for. He told her things too. About the guilt he still carried over moments when he'd been too tired or too short-tempered with Maisie. About the strange social mathematics of being a single father in his early 30s, how he never quite fit the categories other people tried to put him in. It wasn't a perfect 6 weeks. Helena canceled 3 times, once with only 40 minutes notice, and the third cancellation, Callan had already arranged for his mother to take Maisie overnight, and had gone to the restaurant and waited for 25 minutes before his phone rang, and he was not entirely gracious about it, even though he tried to be. They argued about it, briefly and without resolution, and the following day she sent him a text that said only, "I'm sorry." I'm better at managing schedules than I am at being accountable when I fail them. He read it 3 times and wrote back, I know. Me too sometimes. And they moved forward, which was what you did when you decided that the thing was worth the difficulty. What he did not know during those 6 weeks was that someone else had also decided the thing was worth his attention, for different reasons entirely. Dorian Vaymont was 38 years old, Helena's sister's son, and he had spent the last decade understanding himself to be the natural heir to everything his aunt had built. Not because Helena had promised him this, she hadn't, not explicitly, but because the logic of it seemed to him undeniable. He was a Vaymont. He had worked inside the company for 11 years, had risen to senior vice president of operations, had been in the room for decisions that shaped the company's direction. He was smart, presentable, and ruthlessly efficient, and he had long operated with the quiet certainty of someone who knows which door leads to the prize and has only to wait for it to be unlocked. Helena had never corrected this understanding, which was its own kind of mistake. She had been too focused on the company itself to address the question of what came after her, and in that absence, Dorian had filled the silence with his own conclusions. Then Callan Reed appeared. Dorian noticed the change in his aunt, the way attentive people noticed everything not loudly, but completely. She arrived at the Chicago headquarters 2 Fridays in a row rather than 3. She left 2 board meetings slightly early, which she had never done in 11 years. She was, on 3 separate occasions, unreachable by phone for 90-minute stretches that didn't correspond to flights or known meetings. Small things. The kind of things other people would have attributed to a busy schedule or a changing priority. Dorian knew his aunt's schedule better than most. He knew she didn't have changing priorities. She had one priority, which was the company, and she organized everything else around it. He made inquiries, carefully, indirectly, through people who owed him professional consideration and wouldn't examine their own motives too carefully. Within a week he had a name. Within 10 days he had a file. And when he read the file, sitting in the corner office of the Chicago headquarters that he'd occupied for 3 years, and which he thought of, privately, as a kind of waiting room for the larger office, 2 floors up, his expression went through several phases before settling into something quiet and calculating. Callan Reed, 32 years old, building inspector, City of Chicago. Annual salary, $61,400. Savings, insufficient to survive a 6-month emergency. Outstanding debts, 2 credit cards, a car payment on a 2013 Honda, and a recurring deficit between income and cost of living that he managed through the careful prioritization of which bills could wait. Single father, daughter age 7, no family wealth. No connections of any significance beyond a friendship with a real estate developer named Travis Boone, who appeared to have introduced them. 18 years younger than Helena, Dorian read the file twice. Then he sat for a long time, looking at nothing, rearranging information into the shape that best served the conclusion he had already formed. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call a private investigator. He called a journalist. Not directly. Dorian was careful about directness, had been all his life, because direct action left fingerprints. He called someone who called someone, and that someone passed certain documents to a financial journalist at a Chicago business publication who had written critically about Vaymont Meridian twice in the past 4 years, and was, as a result, both credible and highly motivated to receive interesting material related to the company's principal figure. The documents were accurate. That was the particular cruelty of it. Every number, every debt figure, every piece of financial information in the file was real. What was dishonest was not the facts but the frame, the invisible editorial hand that arranged those facts into a specific shape and then pointed a camera at them. The story went up on a Tuesday morning. Callan was in the middle of an inspection on the north side, a mixed-use building in Andersonville. A contractor who'd been cutting corners on fire egress and clearly hoping nobody looked closely when his phone started doing the thing phones did when multiple people were trying to reach you in a short span of time. He ignored it for an hour because the inspection required his attention and because the contactor was already hostile, and Callan had learned over years that you didn't let yourself get distracted when someone was actively hoping you'd make a mistake. He looked at his phone in the parking lot at noon. 11 missed calls, 7 texts, 2 voicemails. The missed calls were from Travis, his mother, 2 numbers he didn't recognize, his supervisor at the city, and 4 times from Helena. He opened the text first, because that was faster, and read Travis's in order. Call me. Cal, seriously, call me. Have you seen, and then just a link. He clicked the link. The headline said, Vaymont Meridian Founder's New Companion, Love or Leverage. The story was below. He read it in the parking lot of the Andersonville building, leaning against the driver's side door of his Honda, and it had the experience of reading something written about a stranger who shared your name and your details, but not your actual life. The article described him accurately and completely. His salary, his debts, his financial history since Rachel's illness and death, which had left him correctly reported in a hole that had taken him 4 years of careful management to partially climb out of. It mentioned Maisie. Not by name, the reporter had some instinct left, but as a child, a dependent, a financial obligation. It quoted anonymous sources close to the Vaymont organization, who expressed concern that Ms. Vaymont's recent personal changes in behavior suggested she might be vulnerable to emotional manipulation by someone with clear financial motivation. It did not name him as a predator. It didn't have to. It arranged the facts and let readers arrange their own conclusions, which was more efficient and harder to argue with. He stood in the parking lot for a while. Then he called Helena. She picked up immediately. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I'm sorry, I'm dealing with it. We're looking at the sourcing right now. Are you okay, he said. A pause. She stopped. Started again in a different register. I'm fine. I'm angry. My legal team is Helena. He waited until the professional momentum of her response slowed.
Are you okay?
She was quiet for a moment that was longer than her usual silences. No, she said, not particularly. Neither am I. Another pause. Callan, this is going to... She stopped again. He could hear her choosing the next words with more care than she usually needed. This is going to get louder before it gets quieter. The story has already been picked up by 2 aggregators. By tomorrow morning, I know, he said. He was looking at the front of the building he'd just inspected. The fire escape that wasn't up to code. The contractor who'd hoped nobody would look closely. Sometimes people looked. That was the job. It's okay. It's not okay, she said sharply. None of this is... I'm okay. It's uncomfortable. It's humiliating. He said the word straight because that's what it was. But I'm okay. She was quiet. Are you somewhere you can talk? He asked. I'm in the car. I cleared my afternoon. Okay, he said. Then talk. By the time he got home that evening, the story had been picked up by 4 additional publications and a local television news brief that had managed to find a photograph of his building, his actual building, the one on South Carpenter, and frame it against a photograph of Helena at a charity gala from 2 years earlier. The visual contrast had been the point. It always was. His mother called twice. He talked to her once, briefly, and reassured her with more conviction than he felt because she had enough to worry about without adding this. Travis came by in person without calling ahead, which was very Travis, and stood in Callan's kitchen looking deeply uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Travis said. Stop saying that. I introduced you. If I hadn't arranged that dinner, if you hadn't arranged the dinner, none of this would be happening, Callan agreed. Also, none of the other things would be happening. So, Travis looked at him carefully. Are you angry?
Yes.
Not at you particularly. He leaned against the counter. Someone fed that story. It didn't come from nowhere. Helena's team is looking into it. I know, Cal. Travis set down his coffee mug. The article implies, I know what it implies. If people think, Travis, he kept his voice level. What I care about right now is one thing. Travis waited. Callan looked at the hallway that led to Maisie's room, where she was doing homework with her headphones on, unaware that anything was wrong, because he had decided, when he picked her up from school that afternoon, that 7 years old was not old enough to have to understand why strangers wrote bad things about your father on the internet. The article mentioned a child, Callan said. A dependent. My daughter. They didn't name her. She has a school. She has a routine. She has friends and a teacher and a normal Tuesday. And by tomorrow morning, there could be someone standing outside that school with a camera because they want a picture to run alongside a story that calls her father a gold digger. He said the last 2 words, flatly. That's what I care about. Travis was quiet. Everything else, Callan said, I can handle. I don't care if people think I'm with Helena for her money. People who know me know better, and people who don't know me don't matter. But Maisie doesn't get to be part of this. She didn't choose this. I chose this. What are you going to do? He already knew the answer. He'd known it for the last 2 hours, driving home from Andersonville with the radio off, running through the logic the way he ran through inspection notes, systematically, without sentiment, until you got to the load-bearing element, the thing everything else rested on. I'm going to call Helena, he said, and then I'm going to end it. Travis stared at him. Not permanently, Callan said, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure whether he believed that. Not because of the article. Not because I'm ashamed or scared, or because I think they're right about anything. He set down his own mug. Because my daughter comes before everything. Before me. Before whatever this is, before all of it. Travis picked up his mug. Put it down again. She might not understand that. Then I'll explain it, Callan said. She's smart. She'll understand. He called Helena after Travis left. Maisie was still in her room. The apartment had that specific evening quiet of a place where a child was present but occupied, the distant muffled sound of a video playing through headphones. Helena picked up on the second ring. I was going to call you, she said. I know. He sat on the edge of his bed. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. A pause. All right, he said it carefully and completely. He told her that nothing in the article changed what he thought about her or what he thought they were doing. He told her that the 18 years and the money and the public scrutiny were things he had considered and was not running from. He told her that Maisie was 7 years old and had already lost one parent and had not consented to being collateral damage in somebody else's game, and that the moment he allowed his own choices to put his daughter's ordinary Tuesday at risk was the moment he had failed the one job that mattered more than anything else he was or had or wanted. He told her he was ending it, not because he wanted to, but because Maisie didn't get to pay for the things Callan had chosen. Helena was quiet for a long time. Are you finished? She said finally. Yes. Another pause. I'm not going to argue with you, she said, and her voice had a quality he'd never heard in it before, careful, in a way that was different from her usual carefulness, like she was handling something she was afraid of dropping. What you're doing is the right thing for Maisie. I understand that completely. I know you do. That doesn't mean... She stopped. I know, he said. Yeah, a long silence. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. This isn't yours. It is partly mine, she said, and the precision of it, the refusal to accept less than her accurate share of responsibility, was so entirely like her that he felt it in his chest. My life created this situation. My existence made you a target. Someone made me a target, he said. Your existence isn't the problem. She didn't answer that. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. A pause. Take care of Maisie. Always, he said. He sat on the edge of his bed after the call ended and listened to the sound of his apartment, Maisie's headphones, the refrigerator, the city outside doing what it always did, continuing. He sat there for a while, long enough that it started to feel like something settling rather than something breaking. He wasn't sure which it was. What happened over the next 8 days was the specific modern experience of being a private person, briefly caught in public light. It was uncomfortable and disorienting and had a surreal quality that came from reading other people's confident assessments of motivations you knew intimately to be wrong. 3 neighbors recognized him in ways they handled with varying degrees of grace. His supervisor at the city called him in for a conversation that was both supportive and bureaucratically careful, because the city had its own concerns to manage. A woman at Maisie's school pickup made a comment not to him, to another parent, in the particular way of someone who forgets that the subject of a conversation can have ears that Callan heard and absorbed and did not respond to because Maisie was 4 feet away and watching him. Maisie knew something was wrong. She was 7 and observant, and she knew him too well for him to fully conceal that the week was hard. She didn't ask directly, which he interpreted as her version of giving him space, until Friday evening when she appeared in the kitchen doorway while he was making dinner and said, "Is it because of Helena?" He turned around. She was standing in the doorway in her socks, holding Gerald by the tail, with the absent-minded grip of someone who used the dinosaur more as a thinking aid than a companion. "Some things in the news," he said. "Nothing important. Kids at school said things." He set down the spoon. "What things?" "That your girlfriend is rich and you're trying to get her money." She said it with the flat tone of someone repeating something they had evaluated and found factually questionable. I told them you worked too hard to need anyone's money. He looked at her. Also, she said, Helena helps with the castle for free. So, he crossed to her and crouched down so he was at her level, and she looked at him with those dark eyes that were so much more aware than a 7-year-old should have had to be. You're right, he said. You've got it exactly right. Then why do you look like that? Like what? Like when Gerald has to go to the vet. He put his arms around her, and she let him, briefly, before squirming back because she had things to do. He let her go. It'll pass, he said. Okay. She looked at him for another moment. Are you going to stop seeing Helena? He hesitated. Because I'm not done with the castle, Maisie said. And she promised. He turned back to the stove. Let's eat dinner, he said. She went back to her room, and he stirred the pasta sauce, and he thought about a woman who had promised to come back, and who he had told, in careful, honest language, that she couldn't. And he thought about load-bearing elements and the things that held the structure up, and what happened when you removed one to protect another. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, sitting in his kitchen on that Friday evening, was that Helena had not been idle. She had not, as Callan assumed, accepted the situation and moved on with the crisp efficiency she brought to every other problem her life produced. She had done something that was, for her, considerably more difficult than efficiency. She had stayed with it. She had sat in her house with the anger and the grief. Yes, grief. She acknowledged it to herself, without much patience for the alternative, and she had done what she always did. When she was angry enough to act, dangerously, she had waited. She had also assigned her head of corporate security to a task that was not technically within the scope of that person's job description, which was finding the source of the leaked documents and tracing the path from their origin to the journalist's inbox. It took 4 days. The document trail was not perfectly concealed. The person who had assembled the file had been careful, but not careful enough, because they had accessed certain internal HR databases using credentials that were logged in a system they apparently hadn't realized maintained an access record. Those logs placed a specific user ID, an internal one, not external, in 3 separate databases at times that corresponded exactly to the 3 categories of information in the published story: financial, personal, and employment history. The user ID belonged to Dorian Vaymont. Helena received this information on a Thursday morning, 1 week after the story ran, sitting at her desk in the Chicago headquarters with her security chief across from her and a printed summary of the access logs on the desk between them. She read it once. She set it down. She was quiet for 45 seconds, which her security chief later described to a colleague as the longest 45 seconds of his professional life. Then she said, "Pull his authorization to all sensitive personnel systems. Today before noon. I want a meeting with legal at 2. Yes, ma'am. And find me everything he's accessed in the last 18 months. The security chief left. Helena sat alone in her office and looked at the document. The thing she had suspected, not Dorian specifically, but someone internal, because the leak had contained information that required internal access, was now confirmed in neat columns of timestamp and user ID and database name. She felt many things in that 45 seconds of silence. Anger was the largest. Under it, something harder to name, the specific disappointment of someone who had built an organization on the principle that trust was structural, that it held the whole thing up, and had found a crack in the foundation. She also felt, in a register she didn't examine immediately, the thing she felt every time she thought about the phone call with Callan on the night he'd ended it. The careful, honest way he had said, "I'm going to end it. Not because I'm ashamed or scared. Because Maisie doesn't get to pay for the things Callan had chosen." She had replayed that conversation more times in the past week than she would have admitted to anyone. She had a board meeting at 11 and a legal call at 2 and a company to run and a nephew to remove from every position of responsibility he'd assumed was permanently his. She did all of those things. The board meeting ran 90 minutes. Helena presented the findings without editorializing, because the facts were sufficient without editorial assistance. She laid out the evidence of the document leak, the internal access trail, the identity of the user. She answered questions. She recommended Dorian's immediate removal from all leadership positions pending a full internal review. And she made the recommendation without audible emotion, because she had learned 30 years ago that the boardroom was not a place where emotional truth was productive, and the only currency that moved things was logic. The board voted 14-1 to approve the recommendation. The one dissenting vote was from a director who had known Dorian's mother, Helena's sister, and who pulled Helena aside after the meeting to say quietly, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Helena said, which was true in the way that most things were true partially, and at some depth insufficient to the actual question. "He's family," the director said. "He was also wrong," Helena said. "Both things are true." The director nodded and said nothing further. Dorian was informed of his suspension that afternoon by legal, in writing, with Helena's signature on the document. Helena did not attend the notification meeting. She had delivered the decision. She didn't need to watch it land. She was already thinking about the next thing, which was the thing she'd been circling for a week without being ready to arrive at it. She stood at the window of her office in the late afternoon of a Thursday, looking out at the city below. Chicago in March, the gray particularity of it, the streets still bare, winter still technically present but losing its conviction. She had built everything she was looking at, not the city, but her ability to see it from here, her claim on this particular view. She had made it herself, which was a fact she was proud of and tired of in roughly equal measure. She thought about a man who had defended her at a dinner table before he knew anything about her. She thought about a 7-year-old who had told her that aesthetic elements should serve the structure. She thought about a load-bearing element she had removed to protect herself from the weight it carried, and whether the structure had held without it, and whether she was the kind of person who left things broken because fixing them required walking back in the direction she had come from. She was not that kind of person. She had never been that kind of person. She was, whatever else she was, someone who saw the repair that needed making and made it. She picked up her phone. She did not call Callan. That was not the right sequence. Callan had made the right decision for the right reasons, and calling him now before she had corrected what needed correcting, before she had done the thing that would tell him, not with words but with action, that this was not going to be a situation he had to protect his daughter from, would be asking him to take a risk before she had earned the right to ask. She called her assistant instead. "Find me the schedule for the Westfield Elementary Soccer League," she said. "Saturday games, spring season," a pause. "For what school district?" "Chicago Public Schools." "Pilsen area," another pause. Is there a specific team you're looking for?" Helena thought about a 7-year-old with a serious face and a stuffed stegosaurus named Gerald and a very specific theory about load-bearing architecture. "Yes," she said. She had one thing left to do before Saturday. It required going to a place she had never been, not physically, but in the particular way that certain actions required you to occupy a position you had always previously avoided. The position of someone who was not managing a situation, but was genuinely uncertain about its outcome and was choosing to move toward it anyway. She had spent 30 years being good at the managed version of things. She was going to have to try the other kind. Saturday arrived the way March. Saturdays in Chicago always did reluctantly, with a sky the color of old concrete and a wind that hadn't decided yet whether winter was finished making its point. The soccer fields at Bridgeport Community Park were mostly mud at the edges and mostly cold everywhere else. And the parents on the bleachers had the specific endurance of people who would sit in considerably worse conditions because small people they loved were running around on the other side of a chain-link fence. Callan was on the third row of the aluminum bleachers with a thermos of coffee that had gone from hot to warm over the past 40 minutes. And he was watching Maisie play left midfielder with the intensity she brought to everything physical, not graceful, not technically polished, but committed in a way that made up for both of those deficits through sheer refusal to be anywhere other than exactly where the ball was. She had been playing for 2 seasons, and she still ran with her arms slightly too wide, which her coach had mentioned twice and which Maisie had absorbed, and then continued doing anyway, because it was apparently how she ran, and no amount of coaching was going to restructure that. He was watching her chase a ball toward the corner flag when he heard it. Not a sound. Just the change in the quality of the space around him, the slight shift in attention that happened when something unexpected arrived in a place it didn't obviously belong. He felt it the way you felt it in a building, when someone opened a door in another room. Not loud. Just a change in the pressure, he turned. Helena was at the bottom of the bleachers. She was alone. No car at the curb behind her, or none that he could see. No assistant hovering at a respectful distance, no one. Just Helena Vaimont in dark jeans and a gray coat that was considerably better made than anything else in the vicinity, standing at the edge of the aluminum seating with her hands in her pockets, and the particular expression of someone who had made a decision and was now engaged in the experience of it. She looked, he thought, more uncertain than he had ever seen her. Not frightened, not apologetic, just present without the usual professional architecture around her, nothing to stand behind. She met his eyes across the bleacher rows. He didn't move immediately. Not because he didn't want to, but because he needed a second to understand what he was looking at, which was a woman who had found out where his daughter played soccer on a Saturday morning and had come there alone, without announcement, without leverage, without any mechanism for controlling the outcome. He moved over on the bench. She climbed the 3 rows and sat beside him. And for a moment, neither of them said anything, because the game was happening, and Maisie was involved in it, and there was something that felt right about orienting toward that first. She's fast, Helena said. She's relentless, Callan said. There's a difference. The relentless ones are harder to stop. He handed her the thermos. She looked at it, then at him, then took it and drank without asking what was in it, which was so entirely unlike the orchestrated dinner settings they'd occupied for the previous 2 months that he almost smiled. She handed it back. They watched the game. After a while, he said, "You found the field. Your address is in a neighborhood. The neighborhood has 1 community park. The park has 2 soccer fields. The spring league schedule is public record." She said this without apology and without particular pride. "It wasn't difficult. You came alone." "Yes. No car at the curb?" "It's parked 2 blocks away." She paused. I didn't want to arrive here with all of that. The car and she stopped. Tried again. "I didn't want to walk in with anything that wasn't me." He looked at her. She was looking at the field, at Maisie running wide-armed toward the ball, and her profile had the quality he'd noticed in that archived photograph from 6 years ago, not the public face, not the composed and watchful expression she wore, in rooms where everyone was watching her, but the one she had when she thought nobody was looking. "Callan," she said. "Yeah. I know what I'm doing is I know you ended it for specific reasons, and those reasons were right. I'm not here to tell you they weren't." She was still looking at the field. Maisie shouldn't have been touched by any of it. She still shouldn't be. "If I'm here and it makes things harder." "It doesn't," he said. She turned then and looked at him directly, and he held the look. The cold was doing something to her cheeks, 2 patches of color that would have been there regardless of the weather but were more visible now. And she looked tired in a way that he recognized as the specific tiredness of the past 2 weeks rather than a chronic condition. "I found where the leak came from," she said. He waited. "Dorian." She said the name the way she said most difficult things straight, without theatrical weight, like a report rather than a confession. He compiled the file using internal database access that was logged. The logs placed him in 3 separate systems at exactly the times that correspond to the 3 sections of the article. She paused. He was removed from all leadership positions last Thursday. Legal is pursuing the full scope of his activities over the past 18 months. Callan absorbed this. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you sorry? He's your family." "He is," she said. "And he used his position inside my company to destroy the reputation of someone She stopped at the edge of whatever word came next. Edited, continued. "Someone who had done nothing to deserve it. Did you know?" "Before. That he wanted the company." "I knew he expected it," Helena said. "That's different from knowing he'd do this. I made an error of omission. I let the expectation stand without correcting it, because correcting it required a conversation about succession that I had been putting off for a decade." She said this with the flat precision of someone conducting a fair audit of their own failures. "He saw you as a threat to something he believed was already his. I gave him the conditions to believe that. That's a very honest thing to say about yourself." "I've had 2 weeks to think about it." On the field, Maisie's team scored a goal. The small crowd on the bleachers produced a sound that was disproportionately large for a spring league game involving 8-year-olds, the particular volume of parents who had been cold for 40 minutes and needed a reason to move. Maisie pumped her fist and ran back to her position with the expression of someone for whom scoring was satisfying, but the game was the actual point. Callan watched her and felt the specific, complicated fullness of watching your child be entirely herself in a way that required nothing from you in that moment. I want to tell you something, Helena said. Okay. When you called me and told me you were ending it, she paused. You said it wasn't because you were ashamed or scared. You said Maisie didn't get to pay for your choices. That's what I said. I've thought about that every day for 2 weeks. She turned the thermos in her hands. He'd given it back to her without thinking, and she'd been holding it since. I have had, in my life, a very limited number of moments where another person showed me what integrity actually looked like in practice rather than principle. Not what someone claimed to value, what they did when the cost of it was real. She looked at him. That was one of those moments. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything, which was the right choice. I'm not here to ask you to walk back into the situation that existed before, she said. The situation before had problems I hadn't addressed. Dorian is one. The public nature of my life is another. The fact that my relationship exists in a context that you and Maisie didn't sign up for. She set the thermos on the bench between them. I'm here because I want another chance, and because this time I'm asking for it honestly, instead of hoping you'll infer it from the things I don't say. Callan looked at the field. You told me once that you weren't good at asking for help, he said. I told you that in November. I've had practice since. This counts as practice? This, she said carefully, terrifies me. So yes, I believe it counts. He looked at her, then really looked, the way you looked at someone when you were trying to see past the version of them you'd assembled in your absence, the composed and curated version your memory produced when the actual person wasn't in front of you. She looked back at him and didn't flinch, which was one of the things about her he'd understood earliest. She didn't flinch from things. She looked at the hard version of reality directly and dealt with it directly, and occasionally this made her difficult, and occasionally it made her extraordinary, and it was never, at any point, anything other than exactly who she was. Our worlds are different, he said. Yes, not just money different. Actually different. The way you live, the demands on your time, the public, the fact that you exist in public in a way I don't, and Maisie really doesn't. I know, that's not going to change. No, she said. It's not. I'm not going to pretend it will or promise you a version of my life that isn't the actual version. She met his eyes. But I can address the things that are addressable. Dorian is gone. My legal team is looking at additional protections I can put around my private associations around you and Maisie specifically. I'm not in a position to make my life simple, but I am in a position to make it safer than it was. That's a very logistical way to describe wanting to see someone. Something shifted in her expression, the almost smile arriving, and this time not stopping at almost. I am a logistical person, she said. I'm trying to use my actual skills. He picked up the thermos, took a drink of coffee that was now definitively cold. The world's being different, he said after a moment. That's not necessarily the problem you're framing it as. She looked at him. You told me in November you said that was exactly why you wanted to try. Because everything in your life had been managed and negotiated and positioned, and this was the first thing in years that wasn't. I remember. Has that changed? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. If anything, the last 2 weeks made it more true. I spent 14 days running a company and removing a family member from his position and dealing with legal and security and board concerns. And the thing I thought about consistently, underneath all of it, she stopped. Then, with the same directness she used for balance sheets and logistics plans and everything else that mattered, was that I missed your kitchen. I missed the pasta sauce and the permission slips on the counter and the crayon drawings on the refrigerator. I missed Miss Maisie explaining her architectural theory. She stopped again. I missed ordinary things that I don't have in my life and that I only understood I wanted because you showed me what they looked like. Callan held that for a moment. That's the most personal thing you've ever said to me, he said. I'm aware. She looked slightly pained. It took considerable effort. He laughed. She looked startled. Then something in her loosened, the way it did in his kitchen on the nights when they were just two people, talking without the weight of context. Helena, he said. Yes, I didn't stop. He paused, organized the words. The 2 weeks didn't change what I think about this. About you. It was hard for reasons that had nothing to do with doubting that. He turned toward her on the bench. But I need you to understand something. Not a condition. Just something I need you to actually understand. Tell me. Maisie is the center of everything I do. Not one of my priorities. The center. Every choice I make starts with her and builds outward. If we ever become something that consistently costs her stability or security, or just her normal Tuesday, I will end it again. Not because I want to, but because that's the order of things for me. He said it straight, the way she said difficult things, because she deserved the same quality of honesty she gave him. She didn't look wounded. She looked, if anything, steadier. I understand that, she said. I understood it when you said it 2 weeks ago. I understand it more now. She held his gaze. I'm not asking to come before Maisie. I'm asking for the chance to earn a place in the world you've built around her. That's going to be slower than you're used to things being. I know, and harder to manage. I know that too. He turned back to the field. Maisie was tracking a ball near the sideline, arms wide, entirely focused, entirely herself. Okay, he said. Helena was quiet for a moment. Okay. Yeah, he looked at her. Let's try the honest version. What came next was not a montage. It was not smooth. It was two people with fully inhabited separate lives, making the recurring, effortful decision to keep making space for each other in those lives. And it looked less like a romance and more like a negotiation that both parties were genuinely trying to be fair about. Helena restructured things on her end. Not dramatically, she wasn't in the business of dramatic gestures, and Callan wouldn't have trusted them if she had been. But practically, she told her security team that certain private information, specifically his address and Maisie's school and routine, required active protection rather than passive. She had a conversation with her communications director about what private meant in the context of her public role, and what she was and was not willing to trade for the appearance of total transparency. These were not easy conversations. She had built her professional reputation partly on the willingness to be rigorously accountable, and protecting private territory felt at first like a contradiction she had to think through carefully before she could act on it. She also told her board at the next quarterly meeting that she was addressing the question of corporate succession with the seriousness it had always deserved and had never quite received. She was going to establish an independent succession plan, external leadership candidates, a structure that did not place any single person's expectations at its center. The board received this information with the undisguised relief of people who had been nervous about the same gap for years and were glad someone had finally addressed it. Helena received their relief with the slight impatience of someone who wished she'd done this sooner, which was the honest reaction, and which she held privately because the boardroom was not a place for that kind of honesty. Callan did his own negotiation with the reality of her world, which was different from hers, and required different adjustments. His was mostly internal. He had spent 4 years as the primary and often only variable in his daughter's life, which meant he had developed a form of control not rigid, not anxious, but dense. The kind that came from being responsible for everything in a system and knowing exactly what each element weighed. Letting someone in required loosening that, and loosening it was uncomfortable in ways he didn't always have words for. He was sometimes short when she called during complicated inspection days. He occasionally retreated into the particular reserve he'd built as a single father, the habit of self-sufficiency that was practical, and also occasionally a wall. And Helena, who had her own version of the same wall, would notice it and give him space rather than push, which was either the right response or the enabling one, and they were still figuring out which. He went to one of her events. A charitable foundation dinner in April, the kind of thing that required him to rent a suit he didn't own and spend 4 hours in a room where he knew exactly nobody, and the food was arranged on plates in ways that seemed deliberately insufficient. He was not comfortable and didn't pretend to be, and Helena did not pretend he was comfortable, which meant they didn't have to perform at each other on top of everything else. She introduced him to 3 people who mattered to her and kept the evening to a digestible length, and in the car afterward, she asked him with genuine rather than polite interest what he'd thought. It's a different language, he said. The whole evening. The way people talk about their work, the way they talk about the causes. It's a different language, and I don't speak it yet. Yet, she noted, I didn't say I wasn't going to learn it. She was quiet for a moment. Then nobody has ever been willing to try before. He looked at her in the back seat of the car. She had the car on these evenings, which was the practical choice, and one symbolic meaning of after the second time. What did they usually do? Either performed fluency they didn't have, which I could always tell, she said, or cited the world was too different and treated that as a conclusion rather than a starting point. I don't like things I don't understand, he said. But I've learned a lot of things I didn't understand. It's usually fine once you know the vocabulary. She looked at him with that expression, the careful, filing one. You're very steady, she said. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. And yes, Maisie, for her part, handled the renewed situation with the pragmatic thoroughness of a child who had already made her assessment and didn't see the need to revise it. When Helena appeared again at the apartment on a Wednesday evening with takeout and the specific intention of finishing the castle's interior design, which Maisie had apparently been planning in the interim and had definite views about Maisie, greeted her with the brisk satisfaction of someone whose schedule had been confirmed. The Great Hall needs columns, Maisie said, before Helena was fully through the door. I saw that from your diagram, Helena said, setting down the takeout. You looked at my diagram? I thought about the column problem on the flight from Denver. She pulled off her coat. I have a proposal. Maisie looked at her father with an expression that said, quite plainly, this is the correct approach to a problem. Then she led Helena to the living room, where the castle had been patiently waiting. Callan watched them from the kitchen doorway, same position as before, same domestic quiet of an ordinary weekday evening. Helena was on the floor again, in trousers that cost more than his monthly grocery budget, explaining to a 7-year-old why the columns needed to be hollow to distribute the weight of the ceiling without compromising the Great Hall floor plan. Maisie was listening with the focused seriousness she reserved for information she intended to use. He thought, this is the thing that is real. Not the charity dinners or the private cars or the complication of her public life or the residual discomfort of being a man in a world he doesn't speak fluently yet. This specific Wednesday. He put the takeout on plates and called them to the kitchen. They ate, the three of them. Helena asked Maisie about school, not the performative version, but actually about the specific project Maisie had mentioned once in passing 2 weeks earlier, about whether she'd finished the research phase, and Maisie looked slightly startled that she'd been retained, and then launched into a comprehensive update that lasted the entire meal. Callan ate pasta and watched the woman across the table lean forward on her elbows and listen to his daughter with the full, undivided attention she usually reserved for board presentations. You remember things, Maisie said at the end of the update. I pay attention, Helena said. It's the same thing. Maisie pointed at her again, the vindicating gesture she deployed when someone said the right thing. That's what I keep telling Dad. They're the same thing. She's right, Helena told Callan. I know, Callan said. She usually is. The weeks that followed found their own rhythm, imperfect and adjustable and occasionally strained, but real in the way rhythms were real when they weren't arranged to look a particular way. Helena learned Maisie's schedule not because Callan gave it to her, but because she asked, and he told her, and she remembered. She knew which days were soccer, which days were the after-school program, which day of the month was library day, which was Maisie's particular favorite because the librarian let her help organize the returned books, a task she approached with territorial enthusiasm. She came to 2 more soccer games. She learned by the 3rd to bring her own thermos. Travis was present, peripherally, the way Travis was always present in Callan's life, gravitationally rather than constantly. He came by the apartment on a Saturday in May, when Maisie was at a friend's birthday party, and Callan had 4 hours of unusual silence, and they drank beer on the back porch in the tentative warmth of a Chicago spring that wasn't quite committed yet. She went to the soccer field, Travis said. He'd heard this from Diane, who had heard it from someone who had apparently been present in the bleachers. She did, Callan said. Alone, Travis processed this. I have never, he said, in 12 years of knowing about Helena Vaymont, heard of her doing anything consequential alone. She does some things alone, Callan said. She's learning to do more. And Travis gestured vaguely, meaning everything. This is happening, Cal. Travis leaned back in his chair. He had the expression he wore when he was trying to say something straight, without the usual irony he kept between himself and anything sincere. I set that dinner up as a joke. I am aware. I thought the age gap would be funny. I thought she'd be stiff and you'd be uncomfortable, and he stopped. I didn't think about her. As a person who could be embarrassed by that. No, Callan agreed. I'm sorry for that part. Not for the introducing. For the framing. Callan picked up his beer. Apology noted and accepted, he said. You're a better person than you perform. Travis made a face. Don't tell anyone. Wouldn't dream of it. From the street in front of the apartment, the sound of a car. Callan recognized the sound, not the car specifically, but the specific quality of a well-maintained vehicle in a neighborhood of vehicles maintained to a different standard. He didn't move. A minute later, his phone buzzed. Helena, finished early. Maisie not back yet? Callan, birthday party until 4. Come in if you want. Travis is here. A pause. Then, is that a warning or an invitation? Both, he wrote back. Travis was reading over his shoulder with the shamelessness of someone who had never believed in the privacy of other people's phone screens. She's coming? Apparently. Does she know about me? The dinner setup? She knows everything, Callan said. She's extremely well informed. Travis looked mildly alarmed. Helena let herself in with the key she had. Callan had given her one in April, not as a statement, just as a practical matter, because she sometimes arrived before he was back from pickups and the hallway was drafty, and he felt bad about that and appeared at the back porch door with her jacket over one arm and the look of someone who had spent a morning in meetings and was currently recalibrating. She looked at Travis. Travis looked at her. Helena Vaymont, she said, extending her hand with the directness that was simply how she was. Travis Boone, he said, shaking it. I know who you are. I know who you are, too. A brief silence in which the full history of the birthday dinner setup hung in the air between them. I owe you an apology, Travis said. The dinner was badly conceived, Helena said, poorly executed, inadvertently correct. Travis blinked. Sit down, Callan said. I'll get another beer. He went inside and stood at the refrigerator for a moment, listening to the murmur of voices from the back porch, and thought about what Helena had said, inadvertently correct, which was the most precisely generous characterization of an error that he'd ever heard, and which was so entirely her that he held it for a moment before getting the beer. He brought it out and sat, and the three of them stayed on the back porch until 4:15, when Callan's phone buzzed with a message from the birthday party host that Maisie was ready. He got up, got his keys, and paused in the doorway. Half an hour, he said. We'll be here, Travis said. He drove to get his daughter. She got in the car with a piece of birthday cake and a napkin and the slightly glazed energy of a child who had spent 3 hours in maximum social conditions and was operating on the last reserves. Good party? He asked. Loud, Maisie said, but good. She ate the cake carefully. Is Helena there? She is. Maisie nodded, satisfied, and looked out the window.
Did Travis apologize yet?
Callan glanced at her in the rear view. How do you know about Travis? I listen, she said. People forget kids listen. He apologized, Callan said. What did Helena say? He thought about it. She said it was inadvertently correct. Maisie turned from the window and looked at him with a 7-year-old's expression of absolute evaluation. That's a good answer, she said. Yeah, Callan said. It really is. He pulled onto South Carpenter and found a parking spot and sat in the car for a moment after he killed the engine. Looking up at the lit windows of the apartment were two people who had arrived in his life by entirely different routes, were apparently getting along on his back porch. Maisie undid her seatbelt. Dad, she said. Yeah, I think this is good. She said it the way she said most things, not tentatively, not with the soft uncertainty of someone hoping for agreement, but with the settled conviction of someone who had evaluated the available data and arrived at a conclusion. Not perfect, but good. He looked at her. Yeah, he said, me too. She got out of the car, he followed, and they went upstairs together, into the warmth and the voices and the ordinary complicated life he was building one imperfect day at a time. 2 years is long enough to understand something. Not completely, you never got complete, not with another person, not with anything worth having, but long enough to know the difference between the version of a thing you imagined and the thing itself. Long enough to know which parts were harder than you expected and which parts turned out to be easier, and to have stopped being surprised by either. 2 years after a birthday dinner on North Clark Street, Callan Reed knew the following things about Helena Vaymont that he had not known when she sat down beside him. She was a worse morning person than she admitted, and the composed professional efficiency she projected by 8A. M required approximately 40 minutes of coffee and silence to produce. She remembered numbers the way other people remembered faces, effortlessly, permanently, with the slight impatience of someone who couldn't understand why everyone didn't. She was a rigorous and unsentimental self-critic who held herself to standards she would never apply to anyone else. And occasionally this looked like strength, and occasionally it looked like the thing that kept her up at 3 in the morning. And it was both. It was always both. She had never learned to fully stop working, but she had learned slowly, with the specific effortfulness of someone acquiring a skill they didn't naturally possess to be present in a room, without the professional layer running underneath everything. She had learned it in his kitchen. She had learned it on aluminum bleachers in the wind. She had learned it on the floor of his living room, beside a cardboard castle that had survived 2 years and 3 repairs, and was now technically a complex, having expanded to include an adjoining fortress and what Maisie described as an administrative wing. Helena knew things about him too, that he carried guilt like a structural element not displayed, but load-bearing, present in everything. That he was slower to anger than almost anyone she'd met, but when he arrived there, the anger was precise and worth paying attention to. That he was a better father than he thought he was, and that the gap between his self-assessment and reality on that particular question was the one place where his usual accuracy completely failed him. That he made decisions the way he conducted inspections, systematically, without sentimentality, until he found the thing that would hold. And that once he decided something held, he didn't revisit the decision, which was either the quality she trusted most or the one that occasionally made conversation difficult, and was usually both at once. They had built something that looked nothing like either of their lives had previously looked. It was not his world or hers. It had its own floor plan. The invitation arrived in October, when the Chicago weather had turned serious again, and the city was doing its annual preparation for a winter that would be exactly as bad as every previous one, and which the city's residents would still discuss with fresh outrage when it arrived. Helena had asked him to dinner. The phrasing of the text was slightly more formal than her usual, which he noticed but didn't examine. Dinner, Friday. Maison Ellery, 7 o'clock. I've reserved the private room. He read it twice. Maison Ellery, the same restaurant. The same private room where 20 people had waited for a joke to land 2 years ago, and where he'd spent an evening talking to a woman he didn't know and had not expected to like. He typed back, the same room? Her response came after a pause that was slightly longer than her usual response time. Yes. Is that all right? He thought about it for a moment, sitting at his desk at the city inspection office. The afternoon sun coming through the window at the low October angle that was already preparing to become December, and thought about the things that had happened in that room, and the things that had happened since, and the particular distance between those 2 points, which was not as large as it could have been, and was larger than it sometimes felt. Yes, he wrote, I'll be there. He told his mother about the dinner because she was keeping Maisie for the night, which she did now with the comfortable regularity of someone who had stopped treating it as a favor and started treating it as a standing appointment. His mother was 71 and had the particular quality of a woman who had watched her son carry things alone for 6 years and had the discipline not to say too much about what she saw, because she understood that he was the kind of person for whom too much commentary was worse than silence. She said when he mentioned Maison Ellery, same restaurant, same room, she put Maisie's overnight bag by the door. You nervous? I don't know yet. She looked at him with the eyes she'd been looking at him with for 32 years, which meant she saw considerably more than he was sharing. You're carrying something, she said. He looked at her. I'm fine. I know you're fine. I said you're carrying something. Those aren't the same thing. She picked up the overnight bag and handed it to Maisie, who had appeared in the hallway with Gerald tucked under one arm and the overnight bag requirements already mentally processed. Go have dinner, his mother said. Pay attention. He kissed Maisie's forehead. She was 9 now, had been 9 for 3 months, and she accepted forehead kisses with the tolerant dignity of someone who had decided they were still acceptable at this age and reserved the right to revisit that in a year. Tell Helena hi, Maisie said. I will. Tell her the Western Tower needs reinforcement. We talked about it last week, but I want her to think about it before Saturday. I'll pass that along. It's structural, Maisie said, with the tone she used when she felt her priorities were not being treated with appropriate gravity. Not decorative, I understand, he said. I'll tell her. He drove to the restaurant. The valet at Maison Ellery was different from the one 2 years ago, but the jacket was the same, the immaculate, unnecessary jacket that had told him, The first time, exactly what kind of room he was walking into. This time he handed over his keys without the particular dignity of a man, pretending not to care about his car. He didn't think about it at all, which was its own kind of change. Inside, the same hum, the same assured quiet of a room that had never needed to announce anything. Helena was already there. She was standing near the entrance to the private room rather than seated, which was unusual. Helena always managed rooms by being already settled in them, already calibrated to the space, so that other people arrived into her presence rather than the reverse. She was in dark blue, something simple that was obviously not simple, her hair down the way she wore it on evenings that weren't professional performances. And she was holding a glass of wine with both hands in the way she did when she was thinking. She looked up when he came in. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early. You're always exactly on time." "This is different." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "It is." He studied her for a moment, the careful posture, the wine held with both hands, the slight quality of someone who had prepared extensively for a specific moment and was now inside the moment discovering that preparation and experience were different things. "Come, sit down," he said. They went into the private room. The same long table, though tonight there were only two place settings at one end, facing each other. Someone had arranged flowers, not the elaborate centerpieces of a catered event, but a single low arrangement that didn't obstruct the sight line between the two chairs. He noticed that and understood that Helena had specified it, because she specified everything that mattered to her, and clear sight lines mattered. They sat. A server appeared, took brief instruction from Helena, and disappeared. The room settled into its own quiet. 2 years, Callan said. 2 years, Helena agreed. In this room. He looked around at the walls, the lighting, the table where 20 people had sat, and a joke had failed to work the way its architect intended. "Feels different," he said. "It is different." She set down her wine glass. "We're different. We are." She was quiet for a moment, and he let it be quiet, because he'd learned that her silences were not absences but preparations, and the thing after a Helena silence was usually worth the wait. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I've learned in 2 years, which is not a thing I expected to be doing in my 50s. Learning, I mean. Not in the way I've been learning." "What have you learned?" She turned her wine glass slowly by the stem, an old habit. "That I built everything I have by being certain," she said. Certainty was the skill. You identified the correct analysis, you committed to it, you executed. And the certainty was correct often enough to produce results, which reinforced the habit. She paused. "And then I met someone who showed me that the things worth having were precisely the ones where certainty wasn't available. Where you moved towards something without knowing how it resolved." She looked at him. "That was new. For me too," he said. "I was certain about exactly 2 things after Rachel died. Maisie and the work. Everything else I'd more or less stopped expecting." "I know. I hadn't stopped wanting it," he said. "I'd stopped expecting it. Which you can convince yourself is the same thing if you're busy enough." Helena looked at him with an expression that had no professional residue in it whatsoever, just the face she had when she was fully present without the armor, which was the face he'd been watching arrive more and more completely over the past 2 years. "You weren't supposed to be what you are," she said. "I want you to understand that. I walked into that dinner with no expectations of any kind. I sat beside someone I hadn't been told about, and I watched him defend me to a table full of people who were laughing, and I thought, I want to know this person. Not what he can offer me, not what category he fits. Just this person." He held that. "Nobody had done that in a long time," she said. "Defended me before they had a reason to. You deserved it," he said. "Someone treating you like a person at a dinner table is not a remarkable act." "It felt remarkable," she said. "That's what I'm telling you." The server returned, set plates, disappeared again, with the practiced invisibility of someone who had understood from the room's quality of attention that this was not an evening for presents. They ate, and the eating was the way their meals had become over 2 years, not a performance of enjoyment but actual enjoyment. 2 people who had learned each other's preferences and eating habits, and the specific way each of them moved through a meal, which was faster for him and more deliberate for her, and who had stopped making accommodations for the difference and simply occupied the same table at their own individual speeds without apology. He told her about Maisie's structural concern regarding the Western Tower. Helena listened with complete seriousness and said she had been thinking the same thing and had a proposed solution involving interior bracing that she wanted to discuss on Saturday. He told her his mother had called the previous week and said, in his mother's particular way of saying things, that Helena was good for him, which from his mother was the highest available endorsement and the verbal equivalent of a standing ovation. Helena looked, briefly, like someone who had received news that mattered more than she'd expected. Your mother doesn't say things she doesn't mean, Helena said. No, she has a very limited tolerance for anything she doesn't mean. I respect that. She knows. They finished eating. The plates were cleared. The room had the quality of an evening arriving at its point, and Callan felt it the way he felt the structural logic of a building, not dramatically, but specifically, the sense of what was load-bearing and what was ornament. Helena reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. She set an envelope on the table between them, not large, the size of a note card. Before I say what I want to say, she said, I want to show you something. He looked at the envelope. What is it? Open it. He picked it up. Inside was a single folded document, not long, not complex. A legal summary, from what he could tell. He read it through once, then again, because the first reading produced a reaction he wanted to verify. It was the framework of Vaymont Meridian's new succession plan. External candidates, independent board evaluation criteria, a structured leadership transition protocol that removed any single individual's personal relationship with Helena from the equation entirely. The document was dated 6 months prior and signed. This has been in place for 6 months, he said. Yes. You did this 6 months ago. I started it 8 months ago. The final version was completed in April. He set the document on the table. Helena, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to think I was doing it for you, she said directly. I wanted to do it because it was the right thing to do for the company and for myself. And then I wanted some time to make sure I'd done it for those reasons and not to show you. She held his gaze. I spent 4 months checking my own motivation. I do that with major decisions. And it was the right decision, she said, fully and independently the right decision. The fact that it also addresses something between us. She paused. That's coincidence shaped by integrity, not performance. He folded the document and put it back in the envelope. You have thought about this more carefully than most people think about anything. I think carefully about things that matter. She said it without emphasis, which was how she said things that were true. You matter. This matters. I wanted to be certain I was building on real ground. The room was very quiet. I have something to tell you too, Callan said. She waited. He reached into his jacket pocket, the interior one, the one he'd been aware of all evening, the way you were aware of something you were carrying that required care, and set a small box on the table. Not the envelope side, his side. He set it in front of himself, not in front of her, because it was a question and not a delivery. Helena looked at the box, then at him. She didn't say anything. I bought this 3 weeks ago, he said. I was going to ask you somewhere else. I had a plan. Actually, Maisie helped me with it, which meant it involved the cardboard castle somehow and was significantly more elaborate than anything I would have designed independently. He paused. But then you asked me to dinner here, and I thought, here is where it started. This is where I sat next to someone I hadn't met and thought, I want to know this person. And that seemed like the right place to close the loop. Helena's expression had done something he had never seen it do. The composed, watchful quality, the one she wore in boardrooms and at galas, and in every photograph he'd ever found of her, was simply gone. She looked like someone with no layer between herself and the moment she was inside. You've been carrying that for 3 weeks, she said. I wanted to find the right time. 3 weeks. You travel a lot, he said. The timing is complicated. Something broke loose in her expression, not quite a laugh, not quite the almost smile he'd been collecting since November of the previous year, but something in the family of both of those things, something that was entirely involuntary and entirely her. He opened the box. The ring was not extravagant. He had not bought it to communicate financial ambition or to compete with a world he wasn't from. He had bought it because it was what he could afford that was also genuinely beautiful. And those two criteria were not as incompatible as people assumed when they stopped thinking about it. A single stone, small and clear, set simply. The kind of thing you could wear every day, without thinking about it, and without it feeling like a statement. I know your life is complicated, he said, I know the public part of it is real, and it doesn't disappear, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. I know I'm 18 years younger, and people are going to find that interesting for reasons I mostly don't care about. He looked at her. I know that combining your life and mine is an ongoing negotiation that neither of us is going to be perfect at. He paused. I'm asking you anyway, because what we have is real in a way I didn't expect to find again, and I'm not interested in leaving it unacknowledged. He slid the box slightly toward her. Helena Vaymont, he said. Will you marry me? The room was so quiet he could hear his own pulse. Helena looked at the ring. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and set something on the table. Another ring box. He stared at it. I bought this 5 weeks ago, she said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone exercising tremendous control over what wanted to be a different kind of moment. I had an entirely different plan. It was very organized. There was a reservation and a speech that I wrote and revised 11 times. She looked at him. And then you set that box on the table. He looked at her box. She looked at his. You were going to ask me first, he said. I was going to ask you first, Helena. I'm aware. She cleared her throat. This is open it, he said. She opened it. Inside was a ring that was different from his in material, and identical in spirit, not trying to impress, not performing wealth, just something beautiful that she had chosen specifically because she had thought about who he was and what would suit him, and had trusted her own knowledge of him enough to commit. He looked at it for a long moment. You thought about what I'd actually want, he said. I've been paying attention, she said, with the faintest echo of what Maisie had said once at a dinner table, which he caught and which she caught him catching. Who asks first, he said. You technically already asked. You had a speech, 11 revisions, it's no longer relevant. Helena. She looked at him, and the expression on her face was the one he'd been falling for since a February birthday dinner, the one that had nothing professional in it, the one that was just her serious and certain and genuinely, completely, terrifyingly present. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. He laughed. She laughed. And for a moment, the private room at Maison Ellery held 2 people laughing at adjacent boxes on a table, which was not the version either of them had planned, and was considerably better than anything either of them could have arranged. Later, after the rings had been exchanged, and the remainder of the wine finished, and the server who reappeared had clearly intuited something from the quality of the room, and produced dessert, without being asked, Callan thought about the question of what you told Maisie. He knew the answer immediately. You told her straight. You told her because she was 9 and serious, and had earned, through 2 years of careful observation and very little fuss, the right to accurate information about the structure of her own life. He also knew she would immediately want to know what this meant for the cardboard castle, because, for Maisie, the significant questions were always also the structural questions. Helena was looking at the ring on her hand, not admiringly, or not only admiringly, but with the focused attention she gave to real things that had become hers. Your mother is going to be gracious about this, she said. She's that kind of person. She is. My sister, Helena paused. My sisters will be relieved. She has felt terrible about Dorian since the board decision. She'll be glad there's something to be glad about. What about Dorian? Helena was quiet for a moment. The question of Dorian had not resolved cleanly, because things between family members rarely did. The legal review had found what it found, and Dorian had been removed from the company and had not mounted a legal challenge because the evidence was what it was, and Helena had settled into the specific, long-running grief of someone who had been betrayed by a person they had genuinely cared about, which didn't go away on a schedule and couldn't be efficiently processed. Dorian will have to build something of his own, she said. He's capable of it. He has real ability. He confused inheriting for building, and those are different skills. She turned her wine glass. I hope he figures that out. Do you think he will? I don't know. Honest as always. I think he has the capacity to, whether he has the character. She shook her head slightly. That's not mine to determine. Callan nodded. He understood the arithmetic of that. There were people in your life you could carry and people you had to put down, not because they were worthless, but because the carrying was doing neither of you any good. Understanding the difference was some of the hardest work there was. I want to say something, Helena said. Okay, about the 18 years. She looked at him directly. People are going to mention it. They're going to mention it for the rest of our lives, or at least the part of our lives that's visible to other people. And I want you to know that it has never been, for me, the thing they think it is. What do they think it is? A power imbalance. A transaction. A midlife, she stopped. I know what they think it is. What is it, he asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. She thought about it for a moment, with the care she brought to things she wanted to say accurately. You were the first person in a very long time, she said slowly, who treated me like a person before treating me like a position. And she paused. I was tired. I didn't know how tired I was until I sat next to someone who talked to me about acoustics and whether chocolate was too sweet and what it meant to raise a child alone. And I realized I had been in rooms full of people for 20 years and had been genuinely lonely in most of them. He held that. The 18 years meant you grew up in a different time than I did, and you carry different things than I carry, she said. That's real. But the thing that made me call you the next morning, the thing that made me drive to a soccer field and sit in the cold on an aluminum bench, she shook her head. That had nothing to do with your age. I know, he said. I know you know, she met his eyes. I wanted to say it out loud anyway. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him, which she always did now, the slight self-consciousness of the early months, long since replaced by the comfort of a gesture that had become theirs. I want to tell you something too, he said. About the money. She waited. When it first. He organized the words the way he always did, from the inside out, the true version first, the articulation second. When I understood what you were, how much you had, I thought about it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't, not because I wanted it, but because it was the thing everyone was going to say mattered, and I needed to be sure I knew what was actually happening versus what people were going to assume. And I was sure, he said, pretty quickly. Because the things I kept wanting more of, they were the Thursday dinners and the phone calls from airports and watching you on my kitchen floor explaining load-bearing principles to my 7-year-old. He paused. None of that had a price attached. Helena looked at him steadily. No, she said, it didn't. The money is yours, he said. I'm not interested in it. I know you're not. I'm interested in you, he said. Which includes your life, which includes your work, which includes the parts of your world I don't understand yet and am learning. But the money, he shook his head. That's just the thing that tells me what happened when you worked very hard for a very long time. It's information about you. It's not the reason. She was quiet for a moment that had the quality of something settling, not conclusion, but accommodation, the kind of moment when something you'd been holding carefully could finally be set down. You are the most honest person, she said, not admiringly, exactly. More like someone noting a fact they'd been confirming over 2 years and were now prepared to state definitively. You're honest too, he said. I'm accurate, she corrected. That's different. Honesty is emotional accuracy. You have both. He almost said something modest, caught himself, and accepted it instead, which was its own form of growth. They married in December, on a Saturday that was cold in the specific Chicago way that was not dramatic about it. The ceremony was small. His mother, his 3 closest colleagues, Travis and Diane, Helena's sister and her family minus Dorian, who had not been invited and had not expected to be, and 6 people from Helena's professional life who were genuinely friends rather than associations. And Maisie. Maisie wore a dark green dress she had chosen herself after considering and rejecting 4 other options, and she carried Gerald in the inside pocket of her coat, which she did not explain to anyone, and no one asked her to. She stood next to Callan during the ceremony, with the composed seriousness of someone who understood that the occasion was important and had prepared accordingly, and when the officiant reached the part where Callan and Helena exchanged rings, Maisie watched with the focused attention she gave to things that were structural. Afterward, at the small dinner that followed at a restaurant that was nothing like Maison Ellery and everything, like a place where actual people ate food they actually wanted, Maisie sat beside Helena and showed her the revised engineering plans she'd drawn for the Western Tower reinforcement, which she had brought in her coat pocket alongside Gerald, because she had considered the timeline and determined that Saturday was the appropriate moment to advance the project. Helena studied the drawings with complete attention. Interior diagonal bracing, she said. Triangulated, Maisie confirmed. Triangles are the strongest shape. They are, Helena agreed. You're thinking like a structural engineer. I know, Maisie said, with the equanimity of someone who had known this for a while. Then she looked at Helena with the direct, assessing gaze she deployed when she was about to say something real. "I'm glad you came back to the soccer field," she said. Helena set down the drawings. "I made a promise," she said. "About the castle. That's not why I'm glad." Maisie looked at her father across the table where he was talking to Travis with the ease of two people who had been arguing and forgiving each other for 25 years. Then back at Helena. "I'm glad because he's better when you're here." Not different. Just, she searched for the word with the thoroughness she brought to everything. Less like someone doing it alone. Helena looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Maisie," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Maisie picked up the drawings. "We should start on Saturday. The Western Tower has been pending too long." "Saturday," Helena said. "I'll be there." Here is what the story is actually about. Underneath the restaurant and the newspaper article, and the ring boxes and the cardboard castle, it is about the difference between surviving and choosing to be alive. Callan Reed had been surviving for 6 years when Helena walked into a room he hadn't expected to matter. He'd been doing it honestly, even admirably, in the way that people who have no other option develop a specific quality of endurance. He was good at it. He'd made a life that was real and purposeful and anchored in the most important thing he had. But surviving is not the same as reaching for something, and he had stopped reaching without noticing he'd stopped. Helena had been something else. She had been succeeding by every measure her world offered, which meant she had more of everything a person could organize a life around acquiring, and had arrived at 50 understanding that more was not the category that had been missing. The missing category was simpler and harder than that. It was the willingness to be known by someone who had no reason to look past the surface and did it anyway. What both of them had to learn, and they learned it imperfectly, with effort on an ongoing basis, was that love at a certain point in your life does not look like it does at 22. It doesn't arrive as revelation, it arrives as decision. You look at a person clearly, without the softening that infatuation provides, and you see the actual person, the difficult and the generous and the limited and the extraordinary, and you decide that this is the person you want to continue in the direction of. And then you make that decision again the next day, and the day after, because that is what it actually is. Not a feeling that carries you, but a practice you maintain. Callan had known how to maintain things. He'd just forgotten that he was allowed to maintain something for himself as well as for Maisie. Helena had known how to build things. She just built them in the one direction she understood, until someone showed her there were other directions entirely. And Maisie, 9 years old and already the most accurate person Callan had ever known, had understood something neither of the adults had articulated cleanly, that the strongest structures were not the ones that resisted outside force through rigidity, but the ones that distributed the load. That what made something last wasn't the absence of pressure, but the quality of what you built to share it with. Triangles are the strongest shape. She was right about that. Years later, not so many that the early days were obscured, but enough that they had the clear outline of things seen from a comfortable distance. Travis Boone told the story of the birthday dinner at every opportunity. He had refined it over time into the version that was most entertaining, which meant he was the architect of a beautiful accident rather than the author of a failed joke, and he told it with the warmth of someone who had long since made his peace with what it actually was. Callan always listened to the Travis version patiently, and then corrected one thing: you made the joke. Helena made the second date. And Helena, from wherever she was in the room when he said this, which was never where you'd expect her to be, because she moved through rooms on her own logic and always would add, without looking up from whatever she was doing, best decision I ever made. She said it with the flatness of someone reporting an accurate fact, which it was. They did not have a perfect life. Callan was still occasionally too self-sufficient for his own good, and Helena was still occasionally more manager than partner, and the 18 years were sometimes invisible and sometimes not, and the public dimension of her life required ongoing navigation that neither of them had mastered and probably never would. Maisie grew up knowing both of those things, the difficulty and the real thing underneath the difficulty, and turned out to be someone who understood, at an early age, that the second thing was the reason for the first and not the other way around. The cardboard castle eventually was dismantled ceremonially when Maisie was 11 on the grounds that it had served its purpose and the living room needed the space. Helena attended the decommissioning. They took photographs. Maisie kept the drawbridge for reasons she did not explain, and it lived on her desk for years afterward. A small functional hinge mechanism made of cardboard and packing tape, and the collaborative certainty of three people who had understood, even then, that aesthetic elements should serve the structure. What began in a restaurant on a February night, with a joke that missed its target, and a man who stood up when a woman he didn't know sat down, what began there became something that none of the 20 people at that table could have predicted, and that the two people most involved had not expected, and that the 7-year-old with the serious face and the stuffed stegosaurus had apparently understood from the very first Wednesday evening when a stranger sat on her living room floor and took her architectural theories seriously. It lasted, not because it was easy, and not because either of them was remarkable in isolation, but because they both understood, somewhere beneath the planning and the precision and the careful management of difficult things, that you did not find a life worth having by waiting for certainty before you moved toward it. You moved toward it, and then you stayed.